Greetings and salutations, viewers. Welcome to BookExpo 2018. I am Charles from Inspire the Muse, coming to you today with another author interview. This time round, we are talking to Gunter Swoboda. Thank you for taking some time out to talk to us.
Thanks, Charles, for having me on.
We were hoping to learn about your recent book and your upcoming book, just what they're all about.
Okay, so let me start with the recent book, which is Mountains of the Sea, which is essentially a story about a young English aristocrat in 1776.
Okay.
So imagine a young guy, comes from a really wealthy family, spoiled in many respects, but also highly rebellious.
Okay.
And a series of events happen which essentially gets him what you might call deported from England. And he ends up on Captain Cook's ship, leaving for the South Pacific. And
I'm sure it'll be fine.
It could go
What could
several.
go wrong?
That's right. It could go several ways. But eventually, what happens is he's left in essentially pre-contact Hawaii, and so he's a fish out of water. He needs to adapt, and what used to work for him in England doesn't work anymore, and so the story unfolds from there.
Very cool. And your upcoming release?
My upcoming release is a book called Making Good Men Great. By profession, I'm a psychologist and a coach and a mentor. And my work is predominantly with men ranging from the age of 13 to, the oldest client I've worked with is 84.
Okay. I'm somewhere in that range.
Yep. So I cover a wide variety of issues. And after about 15 years of working with boys and men, one of the things that became very clear for me was that we should be doing better given our level of affluence and the sort of technological and mental health professionals available to us, but we're not. We're actually psychologically and socially doing worse than what we did 35 years ago. So the question came up for me, well, what's at the root of the problem? Because the conversations we keep having is either men are bad or they're mad. And I think that's
or
a little
both, sometimes?
Sometimes both. But the conversation around that is too shallow. So we don't actually have a conversation that goes right to the root of the problem, which is essentially, and most men never use this word, called patriarchy. So once I went into looking at that, I started really defining a model that helps to explain not just how we just barely survive individually, but also the consequences in terms of our institution like education, corporations, the economy, politics. And so for me, we're on a trajectory that either means we're going to make it or we're going to break it. And I'd like to see us make it.
That would be ideal.
Yeah, and for that, I think individually as men, we need to start thinking about how we need to change in a really constructive way, what sort of evolution we need to pursue rather than trying to, assert another revolution.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very interesting.
So part of the process for me was then to go from the critical analysis to start looking at what sort of curriculum men respond to, because most men don't like going to therapy. They don't like counselling, they don't like therapy, but they're amenable to coaching. It's a bit like, if you've got a bad golf game, go and see your coach. If you're not good at basketball, get a coach. So that whole process became very integral in what I'm hoping to be a very strong movement for men to change, but also then to form really close networks. Because one of the issues that comes up a lot when I work with even 13-year-olds is a sense of alienation. They don't feel understood often, either by their parents. I can
relate to that.
Exactly.
At the time.
Yeah, and so my view is shifting from a patriarchal attitude and ideology into a new form of masculinity that's really inclusive, very respectful. It has a distributive attitude rather than an acquisitional one. So, instead of being greedy, we actually share stuff better. And finally, and I think this is the most important point, is that as men, because we've been so trained into being competitive, we learn how to really deeply cooperate with one another, irrespective of race, religion, creed, colour, whatever it is. Unfortunately, in the current climate, I'm not seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. So they're the two key books at the moment, and there will be more.
That's great. What was your creative process like, bringing these two styles of books to life?
So let me go back to Mountains of the Sea. Initially, the idea came about from me reading an article in a surfing magazine. I surf, okay?
Nice.
So I'm sitting there, I'm reading this article, and I go, this would make a great book. I get to California, and I'm talking to a guy at a conference who's running the conference, and he says, no, look, forget book, think film. So I laughed, and a couple of tequilas didn't help that process a lot. And on the way back to Sydney, I land in Sydney, and he rings me, and as I'm going through custom, and he goes, so give me a date. And I went, what for? And he goes, for the screenplay. What screenplay? And I thought, well, maybe he's got something there.
Yeah.
So, started thinking about how to write screenplays. Got onto Robert McKee, started working with that, really started learning how to script it, script the story, flesh out the characters, do the whole 3-act thing. Met with Phil Goldfarb, who was line producer.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. And he was very, very encouraging. And then I got a writing coach, Seth. He was an Academy Award member. So he and I worked together. Unfortunately, he passed away. But in the meantime, I really want to write that book. So I went, okay, I finished the screenplay. Let me now focus on the book. And the way that I write is, because I'm a movie buff, it's like I sit down and it's like turning on TV and going, okay, which movie we got?
Yep.
So, okay, we're in the South Pacific. Let's put on some background music, and that's how I work.
Very
so
cool.
Essentially, very visually, I've got to be able to picture it well. And so research for me becomes really important. So I'll read historical books around that period. I imagine what it's like to be dressed that way. So yeah, very
to make
sort
it
of
very
immersive.
realistic.
Yeah, very immersive.
Very nice. And what about your other book?
This book really, in a sense, comes together from my training in philosophy as a psychotherapist. And I've got 35 years experience working with people. So I've worked with, and predominantly men. In the early 80s, I was working in drug and alcohol and started working with Vietnam vets. So with post-traumatic stress disorder, from there I went into organisational development, started working with leadership, mentoring management processes, and then workplace injury recovery.
Oh, wow.
And then I went into, I did a big step, went into public service as a senior manager myself, and went, after 4 years, this is not for me. I'm leaving rapidly. Please pull the plug now. And so at a certain point, I really did become very concerned about how I'm seeing men culturally deteriorate. In my area, the local hospital in 3 years had a 130% increase in boys presenting with self-harming and suicidality.
It's a little concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 are suffering from anxiety and depression. Men are significantly more likely to commit suicide than women. We tend to be a lot more successful at it, because often we use violent means, not passive means.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is that sense of struggling with intimacy in our relationship. And one of the things, in the 80s, I was working on the HIV/AIDS project in Sydney. And even amongst gay men, that sense of intimacy in relationships was often missing. Because a lot of it was focused on a sexualized relationship rather than necessarily on an emotional one. I've seen that change, so I've been really encouraged in that respect over the years. Gay couples often have a much longer sustainability in relationship than what we see amongst heterosexual couples, who, it's in Australia, it's about 54% divorce rate.
Really?
So very high. And so the aspect of then, okay, how do we balance this process of alienation out to get men to become more intimate was where I started really focusing my time and my effort and getting men to start being more able and articulate emotionally, to develop a greater degree of empathy, work with their intuition, a lot better than what we tend to do. It's not just, look, just duck, there's a punch coming. Intuition has a lot more meaningful ways of being expressed. And so it's also then a process of learning not to be what's best described as somewhat narcissistic. Patriarchy makes men narcissistic on a scale. Some of it's really mild, and some of it's extreme, like excessive, where we talk about malignant narcissism, and they're often really abusive in relationships. So my aim in then putting this together into a program really got drawn from my clinical experience, my coaching of parents, especially dads, So, stop lecturing the kid, he's not paying attention, he's already glassed over. Actually actively listen to your child rather than just keep telling him what to do, because he'll avoid you like the plague. They're as smart as a white rat. Eventually you're going to come in the door and there's dad, and you're going to go the other way because you know what's going to happen next. And that just isn't good for a relationship. So that process in terms of putting, I guess, inspiration, what's the muse, that, and my wife and partner, who happens to be a feminist mental health practitioner as well. She's a trained feminist, and we often have discussions about why is it that both men and women are shy of looking at this from a more inclusive perspective. The men's rights activists are really on a way off tangent. Just like, it's so scary, it's unbelievable. Because it, as a male and as a therapist, the first thing I'm going to do, either myself or ask my client to do, is to take ownership for what the problem is that you're dealing with. Don't blame it on someone else. The cat didn't eat eat your socks. You left them on the floor. There's a lot of resistance to that.
Unfortunately.
It'll change, hopefully.
Hopefully.
I'm an optimist.
Were there any surprises or lessons learned while bringing these books together?
The biggest surprise for me was that writing fiction for me is significantly easier than writing non-fiction. This went through several sort of versions. The first one, I think, was like about 10,000 pages.
Okay.
And a friend of mine who sort of read it went, dude, no one's going to read this. It sounds like university lectures and it's boring. Okay, thank you. Whereas the fiction, even the first couple of drafts, people were reading it and going, wow, can I have the next chapter? So that was a real insight for me, and I'm not sure whether I can break that. I'd like to.
It's a difficult task.
Yeah, so that was one of them. The other one was how much I love doing it. Even with the non-fiction, it's to me this was like childbirth, painful. Whereas Mountains of the Sea was like I couldn't wait to get to it, to sit down and to keep writing and refining. So irrespective of the difference between the two, I've still got this passion to do it and do more of it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So for our viewers out there, where can they learn more about your books for purchase and pre-order in each case?
Pre-order is on Amazon, and it looks like this. And I'm making the assumption now that Mountains of the Sea will go through the same process. So it'll be through all the major outlets, Barnes & Noble, Dymocks, all those outlets.
All the good places.
The other way of finding out what I'm doing is to hop on my is to Google me and to go on my website, and there's a couple of other places to find out about me. So yeah, that's the easiest thing to do.
All right. I encourage our viewers out there to go do so. Find these books, purchase one, pre-order the other, And after having read them, please post a review online so it can raise the visibility of these books and help others find them and enjoy them.
And I'd love to hear back from you too.
And until next time, viewers, as always, go be creative. Go read a book. Go have some fun.